num num. Birdie num num.
And we are live. Welcome everybody to AB Live. Great to see everybody already pouring into the chat room on YouTube, Facebook, and so forth. Some of you might be noticing, well, those of you who are watching the live video, that I switched out the song for the intro. If you want to know why, it's because I got dinged by YouTube after spending a week in YouTube jail. Then YouTube decided to give me a strike over the other introduction with a song that I had ran it through all these copyright machines and whatever. It was completely copyright free, but they decided no. So YouTube, the Archons are definitely after me in many ways. So I put a new song and a little bit of Peter Sellers and the Party, because you guys know I love Peter Sellers and I love the Party. But anyway, enough of that. Great to see everybody again. And the topic, well, we can never go wrong when it comes to Sophia and Gnostic Cosmology. And our guest is somebody who has been a great friend, an advocate, an explainer of Gnostic ideas, philosophy, the aesthetic of Gnosticism, and really an amazing mind behind such books that I have on my bookshelf. I always go back to when I need resources. Books like Sacred Codes, Hidden Passion, and Enter Through the Image. Yes, I'm getting tongue-tied over here trying to talk about the Gospel of Philip, and that is visionary artist and again great friend of the Gnostics, and that is Laurence Caruana. Laurence, thank you very much for coming back on the show. Great to have you as always.
Thank you so much, Miguel.
Awesome. And with us too, we have another great friend of the Gnostics and Sophia and Aletheia too, and that is the Moon Dog, Vance. Vance, how are you doing?
I'm fine this morning. I had my own Birdie Num session with Birdie just before the show. I feed my bird. So ready to go. Always love this divine feminine subject. So here we go.
Yes, indeed. And I love Laurence. Been watching your presentations on YouTube that you did on the Gnostic worldview and alchemy, and those are incredible and very popular too. Your Gnostic worldview one has like 80,000 hits. Did you think it would be that popular? I mean, you're just doing it at the academy, weren't you? Just as part of your lectures.
Of course, I'm really pleased. On the other hand, I've been trying to get that video filmed for at least 5 years, and the techno-archons always managed to intervene, and we filmed it at least 3 times, and this was the 3rd time, and finally we made it. We edited it together, and it was needed. I hate to say it, but when you search out Gnosticism on YouTube videos, there's not a lot there that is cohesive in presentation of Gnosticism. It kind of goes all over the place, which might be expected for Gnosticism. But I think it was needed. I think a general video that kind of gives the summary of the Gnostic worldview was something that was needed, and I'm happy that I was able to fill that need through this work.
Yeah, indeed. I would say for the audience, check it out because it's a good hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's split into 3. You could do a good introduction. I don't know how you did it, but in 40 minutes, we get a good historical overview of Gnosticism. Then you go to the creation myths. So it was needed, and it has, again, a lot of views. I think I have a few videos that are in the 80 to 100,000, but I've been doing this for a long time. I have a lot of content on different things. So I think you're 100% right. It's hard for somebody just to go, I just need a good linear overview of Gnosticism that works. And I know we've talked a lot about this before. We've brought it up, Laurence, but since it's been a while since you have graced the virtual Alexandria, how did you become interested in Gnosticism? I know you were talking in your presentation, The Gnostic Worldview, how you were in your early 20s and you read the Gospel of Philip, and that was a spark.
Yeah, we kind of forget. Yeah, that it would have to go back to around 1976 or so. So this is when the first paperback mass market versions of the Nag Hammadi texts were actually being published. And it was really something quite new back then. So I remember picking up the Nag Hammadi library edited by James Robinson, and going through it. I'm primarily a painter. And as a painter, I was looking for a version of Christianity that was moving into the broader spectrum of what Christianity is. And honestly, I found it almost incomprehensible. But I took away a few gems, you know. I took away exactly this quote from the Gospel of Philip, enter through the image. And it was something which intrigued me. I just copied it out on a piece of paper and put it over my easel, enter through the image, and wasn't quite sure what it meant, but it revealed itself to me over time. And I think I could say that with almost all the Gnostic texts, that they have doorways in, and you discover a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph, something that grabs you and intrigues you. And then as you start to follow it deeper and deeper, and it kind of becomes a place for lots of rabbit holes, you know, a place where you can go left and go right and make connections because of this odd language that they have, where you have to connect this idea with that idea until you start to piece it all together. And I'm really still in that process of trying to piece this massive thing called Gnosticism together in my head, you know. I think the lecture I gave at the Vienna Academy of Visionary Art, which is now on YouTube, is my latest attempt to summarize it in such a way that I could say, okay, I think I understand now that basically here's the creation, here's what happens during the time of Christ, and here's what happens afterwards and after we die. And this is kind of Gnostic worldview. But it's really an ongoing process. And as I hope to show you during this next couple of hours, that I'm going deeper and deeper as part of my life projects to create Gnostic paintings and Gnostic chapel and so on. So
wonderful. And yeah, I think you hit it on the head, or it's a good point to bring up, that many of these traditions, from Hinduism to Buddhism to Christianity, have had thousands of years for exegesis and commentary. It's really the late 70s before you finally get some fuel on the fire of Gnosticism with the Nag Hammadi library. So we have just started truly understanding it. And I also, like I tell people, you're never going to get really a 10 steps for salvation or 10 steps from Gnosis. I think, as June Singer said, Gnosis speaks to us differently. It was a very individualistic movement, and it had small lodges where you'd have, like the ancient traditions of Egypt, you had a hierophant, a guy playing the Hermes, who would get his audience worked up and teach them and get them into an altered state of mind. But then you had another lodge that was different. I mean, so it's exciting, but if people are looking for some sort of linear answer or structured way, Laurence, you don't think they're going to find it in Gnosticism?
So
go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to add that exactly. I also came from a tradition where I had a Christian or Catholic background, but had started to, like many people, look into other sacred traditions like Buddhism and Hinduism, but also ancient Egypt and tribal and even Mayan societies. And each one has its value, is extremely valuable. And then the question arises in our mind, how does it all fit together? How can Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, ancient Egypt, how can these start to mesh? And I think that in Alexandria, in the first century of our era, something very similar was happening, which is the birthplace of Gnosticism. And that the people who lived there, and probably the source of Gnostic texts is around Alexandria, we don't know for sure, we're very much combining Judaism, early Christianity, ancient Egyptian beliefs, but also a whole series of other fields which I've been researching on my own. And those fields that I'm thinking of are, for example, theurgy, which people might not be familiar with, but Ian Blickus, his book On the Mysteries, is also from the same time period and covering a lot of the same territory as the Gnostic texts. And then you have the Greek magical papyri, for example. You have alchemical texts, like from those of Zosimus, who himself was from Alexandria. These all start to overlap each other and use the same vocabulary, Neoplatonism as well. So this idea of the one, the divine one. And as you kind of branch out from Gnosticism, you can go so far as to go into India and Tibet, but if you just keep it within that area of northern Egypt and Alexandria, you're already discovering a whole series of parallel pursuits with Gnosticism. And that's what I mean by alchemy, theurgy, Neoplatonism, and so forth. And already there, I'm enriching my knowledge of Gnosticism just by reading those texts and discovering more and more about the whole process of where those people were coming from, what their milieu was, and how they were thinking in that time period.
Yeah, as David Brackey said on the show, Gnosis is the one thing that's not exclusive of Gnosticism. I mean, those, like you said, in Alexandria, the Neoplatonists, the Hermeticists, even you can say some of the Merkabah Jews, they were into this. Mm-hmm. You can't, as April DeConnick said, it's not mysticism because you're not passive to some god. You're actually taking these flights, these visionary flights, and perhaps you're going inside, but perhaps it's an altered state of mind. Perhaps it's out of body. It's kind of like the same thing, really, when you think about the microcosm and microcosm of man. But you are actively going to, you might say, hunt for the one, the ground of being, the supreme consciousness, the big bang of awareness, and you are there to stand in front of it. And whatever you come back with, is going to be, it's going to look a little different to every person because we still have to bring this information into our meat sacks and decipher it. So you have all these different. So what an amazing time, you think, in Alexandria when these figures decided we are going to go right to the source of everything, and we're not just going to sit around, rely on faith, or wait to have an awakening or anything. We're aggressive. We're like hunters. We're Gnosis hunters.
And this idea of the one, which I first came across in Neoplatonism through Plotinus. And of course, I was given the word God all the time during my upbringing, and God the Father. And you have a very clear picture of this old man with the beard and so on. The one, suddenly you either are in on that understanding of divinity as a oneness or a unity, or you're not. And it's so surprising to see so many figures in Alexandria in this time period simply referring to oneness. And it's a word or an experience that has come back to us in our culture in the last, let's say, 20, 30 years, which again creates these tribes of people who feel that they themselves are looking for the others who understand or have experienced what oneness is, and sharing that experience of divinity, which, as you say, is mystical, visionary, experiential, Gnostic, this idea of knowing for oneself, knowing through experience what a divinity is. I think that that's what so many people are latching onto and identifying with, is saying that I have the inner spark of light. and I have this which allows me to get in contact with the divine directly, rather than say through this text or through that tradition and so on. So yeah, and the visionary experience, which of course we can go into, because that's a big part of my artistic approach and literary approach to things.
Yeah, we discussed it well, and we hope to definitely cover it here. Visionary art in your book, Sacred Codes. So I guess my next question is, Alexandria, what was going on there that sparked these amazing occultists? Do you think, I don't know how to phrase this, in your book, Sacred Codes, you definitely talk about the Egyptian vibe, that the Egyptians were, you show proof of the Egyptians having these out of body or after death. Like you say, these texts will not only help you in this life, but when you die, you'll get sort of a roadmap to make sure you don't get stuck in the Ouroboros. But you show that the Egyptians had this. So do you think the Gnosticism is pre-Christian and directly mainlines Egyptian mysteries? I mean, it's no secret that the Greek philosophers said that, Plato and all, they had to go to Egypt to be initiated for a true consciousness expansion. So do you think that's what these groups really were mainlining or tapping in at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think that the Egyptian influence on Gnosticism is something which scholars have not covered very deeply so far, and probably because most of them are biblical scholars. That's their area of specialty. They might go as far as early Greek philosophy like Plato and the pre-Socratics, but once you get into Egypt and Egyptology and the study of Egyptology, it's like another domain. And there are a few Egyptologists. Now, this is where itself becomes difficult, because in the study of Egypt and Egyptology, there are the hardline archaeologists who say that we cannot comment on what the texts mean. But then there's a school from Switzerland, and the one I'm thinking of is Erich Hornung, who has done a lot of work in looking at the ancient Egyptian books of the afterlife and trying to really bring them to the public. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about, Alexandria is in the north of Egypt, where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean. But halfway down the Nile around Thebes is Luxor and Thebes on the opposite side of the Nile River. You go west and you go deeper into the desert, and that's where the Valley of the Kings is. And the Valley of the Kings, where the pharaohs were buried. And I've been there, and it's really fascinating. I hope that once in your lifetime you can go. And you basically enter into the tombs of the pharaohs. And if you're prepared, and I was prepared in the sense that I had this book with me. This is, let's see if I can hold it up, Erich Hornung's The Ancient Egyptian Books of the Afterlife. And he will basically lay out in diagrammatic form what you will see on the walls of the tombs, So carved on the walls of the tombs, you actually see these kind of images. And now you can find them on the internet of the boat journey of Ra, or Re, the sun god, through the netherworld. And so as the sun sets in the west, it goes under, or it's not quite clear, but into the netherworld. And it passes through 12 gateways, which are the 12 hours of the night, and reemerges on the other side. And during this time, the sun illuminates those underground passages, and also reunites with the corpse of Osiris, and those souls who have died accompany the solar bark on this underworld journey, only to hopefully dawn, to rise up at the end of this boat journey as a solarized spirit, as someone who will then, with the boat of Ra, participate in the afterlife. And they are quite clear when you start to study and read these texts. And again, it's not simple, because you're just given image after image after image with names. And fortunately, we've been able to translate the hieroglyphs as of Champollion in the late 1700s. So we can read what the hieroglyphic names are, and it's just name after name after name, being after being after being. It gets a bit tiresome and confusing, but so do the Gnostic texts. It just seems to be long lists of these figures. But once you know the Gnostic texts, and once you start to read the Egyptian books of the afterlife, you start to see parallel after parallel after parallel, and you say to yourself, this little motif over here, it also shows up in the Nag Hammadi texts. So just to give one example, I told you about the 12 gateways, and so one of the guardians of the second gateway is the ass or donkey-faced god. And it kind of sticks in my head because I never imagined an ass or a donkey face to be terribly malevolent. Why would this be so fearful? And yet here he is in this ancient Egyptian book of the afterlife, the Amduat, as this fearful figure that the son has to overcome, or else he'll be caught forever in the afterworld, in another world. And the Archons, as you probably know, are listed in the Apocryphon of John, and one of the Archons is also this donkey-faced god. So this whole motif or mythologem of the soul's journey through the afterlife being a step-by-step process, and it gets translated from this kind of horizontal boat journey in Egyptian mythology to this vertical ascent in the Gnostic world view, where your departed soul is trying to pass through the 7 layers of the cosmos, that is the 7 planets, the visible planets. And the reason why the Apocryphon of John lists them as actually 12, and this is now my interpretation, is that the body is probably the first 5 layers. So the body being earth, water, air, fire, and possibly the ether. So as you die, your body dissolves. And as your body dissolves, you lose earth, you lose water, you lose air, you lose fire, and these different bodies or layers of yourself dissolve. And that is the passage through the first 5 gateways. And then you pass through the moon and Venus, the moon. Let's take it in the order that they use. So it would be moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And you pass through each of those 7 gateways, which have their archontic names in the Gnostic tradition. So that is the 12 layers, the vertical layers of the cosmos, so now we've taken that Egyptian model, going horizontally through the gates and turning it vertically, and there you are. And then you move into the realm of the fixed stars. And the realm of the fixed stars is interesting because you come across so many different references from Plato, from, again, theurgy and Iamblichus, and from Gnosticism, that we ourselves are sparks of light, and that the stars are like, we have our star in the heavens, that from whence we came and to which we return. And so we have our cosmic home, so to speak, in the realm of the fixed stars. So I could kind of go on, but that is what fascinates me, is finding that, and this is just one example of how Egyptian mythology or religion, the Egyptian tradition, must have influenced Gnosticism. And let's not forget that the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered, that they were possibly written in Alexandria, which is in Egypt, discovered in Nag Hammadi, which is in Egypt. And there's a reason for that also, is that the climate of Egypt tends to preserve the papyrus on which things are written. But I don't doubt that the Egyptian priests, who were suffering under the Greeks when the Greeks overran Egypt during the Ptolemaic period, Alexander the Great and so on, they were suffering, and they were at the same time trying to hold on to their traditions, trying to translate their traditions into Greek, into the Greek world view, the Greek language, while not divulging all the secrets that they possessed. You know, they had a hard time because they were priests coming from a tradition of 2,000 to 3,000 years. And now they were witnessing that tradition fall away, die, be destroyed. And as much as they tried to hold on to it as a secret or as a mystery, they had to translate into existing culture, which would have been Judaism, Christianity, and the other movements that were there in a place like Alexandria, hence the Gnostics.
Wow, that was really well said. And yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, we can talk about how the Demiurge, the representation of the Demiurge, these in the ancient coins, is taken from the fierce Egyptian god Cernunnos, and April Deconic in the Gnostic New Age does an excellent job showing how the myth of Atum, the great snake, the first really representation of the Ouroboros, who closes in and this guy inseminates his own mouth. And it's a great parallel. You don't find this in Hellenistic religion, but it's a great parallel to the invisible spirit peering into bar below. And she produces these gods just as Atum, when he inseminates himself or reproduces with himself. He's the great hermaphrodite serpent. He gives birth to the Egyptian gods. So it's all there. And I don't know if you've heard this theory that the Nag Hammadi library might not be the James Robinson reconstruction, that it was these brave monks hiding heretical texts, and might not be true, but it was actually the Nag Hammadi was a funerary text for people.
Exactly. Yeah, that April Deconic, at least I became aware of that through April Deconic in her book, what's it called? The Gnostics as a Countercultural Movement.
The Gnostic New Age.
The Gnostic New Age, exactly. And when I read that, suddenly lights went off. That her suggestion that, and very little mention is made of this, that there was a body found with the texts, that it was actually burial texts, as you're saying. And we know this tradition, which comes again from ancient Egypt, that the books of the afterlife were buried. Even coffins themselves had the book of the afterlife carved or drawn onto them as their vessel, so that you were given these books to hold on to give you knowledge or read your way through the afterlife journey. To your, I guess the idea being that your spirit and the spirit of the text itself, words, would all kind of be available in this non-material realm that you're entering into after death. And so the fact that this whole Nag Hammadi library was possibly there as a funerary text, that blew my mind, because it changes our interpretation radically of what the purpose of the text was. And yeah, most likely it was the guide to the afterlife journey, which is something that myself, I've been looking deeper and deeper into that tradition of that you would have texts, of course, but you also need images, because images are more easy to remember. And this brings us into the area of mandalas, for example, and how Tibetan tradition, I talk about this in Sacred Codes, that Buddhist monks in the Mahayana tradition, they memorize the entire mandala structure, which can get very, very complex, like 32 deities arranged in the mandala, which itself is a kind of a step pyramid. And so at the very top of the step pyramid, you have the couple joining, and then they're surrounded by 4 deities who are surrounded by another 8 deities, and these are actually consorts, that they're, so this relates to Gnosticism as well. And so these 32, and then it's surrounded by a ring of earth, air, water, fire as a protective ring, as well as these protective deities. And so this entire mandala is memorized by the monk and both of the cosmos and themselves, as above, so below. And when I say as themselves, it's themselves in both their corporeal, soulful, and spiritual makeup. And of course, a mandala makes sense because mandala is something that you can hold together in your mind. And at the same time, it even becomes a vehicle. This is where now I'm going to change channels and jump into theory and Ian Lucas and this tradition, which also is contemporary with Gnosticism, because they talk a lot about the same thing. They talk about the necessity of having a vehicle for these spirit journeys that they undertake. And the vehicle is this mental construct that protects you because it orients you. You as you go through the realm of visions and the realm where you are no longer embodied, you need to construct a kind of a body to keep yourself together as you move through the visionary realm. And so that was the purpose of the Buddhist mandala. When you read a text like the Apocryphon of John, now a very corrupt text, but you can see that they're trying to arrange these 12 Archons and 12 Aeons on Christ, and 12 Aeons around Christ. This is, again, can be arranged as mandala. And the 12 Aeons around Christ, you include all these mental states, we start to say memory and understanding and ID, but also the more positive emotional states of peace and love. So that you need to have all of these inner vehicles, so to speak, to move through those different realms that are represented by different archontic beings and so on in the afterlife journey. It's your boat. Coming back to the Egyptian books of the afterlife, there's Ra, who's the sun, who is luminous, and Ra is on a boat, with deities on the boat itself. There's usually 8 deities on the boat, including Truth, Mat. She, this goddess of Egypt with the feather in her head. Truth is one of the most important figures on the vehicle because as the sun illuminates, the sun wants to illuminate not illusion, truth, and his light passes.
Lawrence, I need to interrupt you.
Yeah.
You're getting a bit choppy. The only thing, could you turn off your video? That might give you more juice.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me just check something here because every so often something gets turned on that I want to make sure it's turned off. Okay.
Yeah. For the audience, Lawrence is in the countryside in France, so he's not getting Comcast.
Apologies. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's okay. It definitely it happens. We're used to it.
Yeah. So you want me to turn off my video for a moment, or?
Well, now it sounds good. Oh, yeah, he sounds good, doesn't he, Vance?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's possible that I turned off my backup, but it turned itself back on. I automatically back up files, and so I turned it off again, and hopefully that might work. I'm just going to turn off a few more things just to make sure. Yeah. But my apologies for that. I was really getting into my
really getting
into my
explanation and so on.
From Egypt, Mandala. Yeah, I think for those of you who read the Gnostic texts and you're reading the Secret Book of John or the Nessenes, and you go, what are these guys? What drugs are these guys on? And they probably were on some entheogen, but think of these as mandalas, the structure of the brain, the structure of the brain, the mind of God, and meditate them. So these stuff is living and it can be useful, right, Lawrence?
Yeah. What I find funny is that when you read the Gnostic texts, they're fragmented, and you're reading a sentence and suddenly you miss 3 or 4 words, and then it continues. And the same thing happens in the 21st century, except now it's the internet connection that's removing fragments fragments from
We got
what I'm saying.
Lacuna in our interview. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So how is the connection now? Am I still disappearing, or
Smooth.
am I present?
Smooth. Right now you're
Smoother?
back smooth.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Something we yes, I think
All right. It
something was
must have
just
been that backup.
draining.
Yeah. Thank you
And
for pointing that out.
oh, no problem, no problem. And for the, I mean, when people say it was Gnosticism earlier than Christianity, I always say, well, it's kind of a straw man because there was no breakup. It's a continuation, don't you think? It's like there were these Egyptian mysteries. They were probably starting to fade because the Greco-Roman world and Serapis and other gods were moving in, and people were just losing interest in this primordial faith that, like you said, is experiential, shamanistic, visionary, out of body faith. And there were those in Alexandria who simply, they didn't let it die. They just continued with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's what the church is missing when the church then took over Christianity. And the same could be said with the temple tradition in Judaism, that suddenly they simplified it all down to something very moralistic. In Christianity, it's you will be judged on your good actions and your bad actions, not what you know, not what you've experienced, but rather what you've done, and whether that is within the moralistic code that they've laid down within the church. And you have these balances of good and evil, and if you did more evil than good, you go to hell, or if you did more good than evil, you go to heaven. Very simplistic explanation of what happens in the afterlife. And obviously what we're getting from these other traditions, which are visionary, is probably people who have had visions and interpreted those visions as this is information about the afterlife journey. And as they start to really explore the territory of these visions, they start to realize that there are consistencies and like a geography, if you want. And they start to put together the geography, which happens to then mesh with the whole cosmic framework that they're in the process of understanding at the same time. So it definitely is like a science of the age, but a science that is trying to understand not just the world that we perceive, but the world that we access through visions, and that is the afterlife world, and so on. The higher heavenly world.
Agreed. And yeah, for the audience, as somebody once told me, the Egyptians were not obsessed with death. They were obsessed with eternity. That was their big thrust. That was why that's where they spent every minute worrying about and tweaking and creating that spiritual tech to really connect us with eternity, with a continuity that is existence, that is consciousness. So it's yeah. And we lost it, but it has been carried throughout the centuries. And Vance, any questions from you or the audience? I think I saw somebody come in and say that all three of us were going to hell. But
oh, really?
I saw that. It said, but I'm like, you don't ask that to a Gnostic, because he's just going to say, we are in hell, man. We are in hell. We're not going anywhere. It's a state of mind, brother.
Well, here's one for Laurence. While you were talking, I had the idea that we always talk as if we have like one unified time frame, and we're all little actors within a big universe. What about the idea that actually each of us is an individual journey of the one through a kind of formulated universe, and we're actually not in the same universe, even though our avatars appear in many universes and we can see each other's avatars, but the one is really always the one, and wherever it's looking from, that's all there is.
Yeah,
kind of a multiverse.
And if you enter the visionary realm, sometimes you come across these places where there seem to be thousands of beings with eyes gazing at each other. And the question then becomes, are these unified? Is it a unified consciousness, or is it a disunified and separated consciousness? So hell seems to be one of those places where the disunity exists and everything is fighting. You know, the demons are fighting the fallen souls and they're tearing them apart, and there's this struggle. Whereas the heavenly realm, then you have the many, but the many see each other, and they see each other as reflections of themselves. And so as you see each other as a reflection of, you know, you realize, I am you, you are me. And so we don't fall into separation, we fall into oneness and unity. So I understand, Vance, how you have this idea that you want to preserve the sense of identity somehow. And I don't think we have to fear the loss of identity or our uniqueness in this higher realm, what's called the upper eons in the Gnostic worldview. I think that we maintain our sense of identity, but at the same time, we can celebrate our uniqueness. And the one is celebrating the uniqueness of its multiplicity. It can celebrate how its multiplicity is just a vast, varied reflection of itself. So that you are, Miguel is, I am, we all are differing reflections of the same thing. So there's difference and there's sameness at the same time. And it's a strange way to think, but I've actually discovered this by reading Plato quite deeply. Is Plato had a form of thinking which is, I call, the logic of sameness and difference, where we tend to think always in terms of difference to classify things, but at the same time we can also think in similarities to bring things back together. And the logic of similarity and difference seeks out the similarities as well as the differences between things. Yeah, it's if I give you a very concrete example, in alchemy it's used all the time because, say, fire and water are pushed apart as separate. That fire is fire is hot and dry, water is cold and moist, and yet they share similarities at the same time, because through air and earth they unify with each other and they start to find ways to relate to each other. They're not just opposites, but they integrate back into each other as opposites. I'm a bit abstruse, I think, in my explanation of things, but similarity and difference allows us to find new ways to think through things, so that we arrive not just at difference, but also at, you know, oneness and similarity. I'll leave it at that.
The deep subject. For the record, it's like I'm not saying that in the context of clinging on to the moondog or Vance identity, but in my meditations, when I strip away everything that's important, like it's not important for me to know how to get to the corner grocery store or how to play the piano or whatever, after you know, the Vance creature's gone, really, I'm left with even the importance of seeing through the kind of eyes that we have, right? Like birds can see, you know, almost all around them and so forth. I'm left with pure being and potential, and that's as close to the one, you know, as as I think I can. So there is like a pure being that can, you know, can emanate into all these things, and isn't that the basis of all the Gnostic cosmologies? Right, the one always starts out with the one, and it emanates. So yeah, that's kind of where I was coming from.
And consciousness and self-awareness, which we all possess as well. Yeah, so that simple act of consciousness, which is both consciousness and self-consciousness, seems to be the what we all share. What unifies us. Yeah, and even though you are self-aware of yourself as Vance, and I'm self-aware of myself as Laurence, we still share this primordial spark, this light of consciousness and self-consciousness. Oh, here we are. You find men are not. Say that again. Yeah, you find men are not going to hell. Hell is already on earth. There you go.
On earth, yes. Even Origin said also this is the highest plane of hell. So, so it's not a bad plane of hell. Awesome. Well, great question. Do you want to start the presentation? I was going to ask you next about Sophia, our favorite heroine, or perhaps villain, or anti-heroine, perhaps. Or do you want to touch upon this during the presentation, Laurence?
I don't really have a specific presentation on Sophia. I did prepare some images for my upcoming project of creating a chapel on the Apocryphon of John, so we could do that later. But in terms of Sophia, I'm very much open to answering questions or discussing who she might possibly be, and it's an endless question in a way that I would just begin by saying that Sophia in the Gnostic tradition is the turning point. Yeah, that we begin. I'm thinking now to the Apocryphon of John, or the Secret Book of John, which is one of the primary texts. But in the Gnostic world view in general, we begin with this one, which is self-consciousness, and as consciousness or mind, it expands through a series of eons, and all of these are reflections of itself. And so even though it's multiple, they're unified, because each one, it could be Christ or the four lights or Enoia, they're all named in the Apocryphon of John. Each one is a reflection until we arrive at Sophia, and then Sophia becomes the break. Now, that break out of unified self-consciousness is a fascinating, questionable thing. And how does it happen? And I think different Gnostic texts give different interpretations of what happened. The one that kind of fascinates me is this idea that she tried to see and understand the one, but her thinking kept on reaching further and further and further out, and could not encompass or fully see the one, and reached a limit called horos in Greek. And this limit then created ignorance. And so she had no choice but to reach the point at which self-knowledge has to be bounded by something. And what self-knowledge is bounded by is ignorance of itself. And I think it's something that we can experience in our own selves, in the sense that, you know, I ask you, Miguel, do you know yourself? And you would say, yes, of course I know yourself, but to what extent, you know? And then we come up to this idea of 20th century psychology, that there is the unconscious, there is those boundaries to consciousness, and beyond the boundary of consciousness is the unconscious. And so what is the unconscious? Well, it's this dark area, like dreams, that don't have a rational, fully structured way of presenting themselves. They lack clarity and form. And if they have form, the form is very, we can say, bestial or so on. And this brings us then to what happened to Sophia. Is Sophia unwittingly creates Yaldabaoth. And Yaldabaoth, why a lion-faced serpent? And we talked about Yaldabaoth, and you gave, you know, this image of the lion-faced serpent shows up again and again in the Alexandrian world, and you can find it in the Greek magical papyri, for example, in ancient Egypt. I'm going to take a much more psychological approach and just say that the serpent and the lion, to me, the serpent is really that aspect of ignorance or unconsciousness in ourselves that is pure desire to either progenerate, to reproduce ourselves, or to eliminate the other. If you have two serpents come face to face, if one is male and the other one is male, they will try to destroy each other. If one is male and the other is female, they will come together to create another. That's the serpent, and that's the serpent in us. We wish to either devour the other, or we wish to join with the other and reproduce ourselves. And it's so unconscious in us. It's so primal that we can't even control it in ourselves. It's such a basic need. So I think that's one aspect that Yaldabaoth is representing, created by Sophia, yeah? And the other being the lion. And the lion is that element of pride. If you study the lion, it is ferocious. And so it is, in the language of psychology, ego, but ego in the sense of I, me, that I see my world and my consciousness is my consciousness of my world, and I wish to control everything within my reach. Sophia herself, something else happens, and this is from now Irenaeus. If you read his version of the Sethian Gnosticism in Against All Heresies, he said that when Sophia reached the limit, she suffered passion. She suffered all sorts of trauma and passion. And that makes a lot of sense too. In other words, when you try to know yourself and your self-consciousness expands as far as it possibly can and then reaches the limit, you suffer trauma. You suffer all the different passions that may emerge. And I think this is what Sophia gave to the cosmos, in a way. Is Sophia gave the creation, because we're talking about the process of the creation. And she then created the passions, she created Yaldabaoth, and she created the material world. That is another interesting thing which is worth discussing. So up until this point, you have the upper eons, and the upper eons, the mind is all purely spiritual. There's no material realm as of yet. Now, if you understand Aristotle, and Aristotle plays a large role in the Nag Hammadi, in the Apocryphon of John. His thinking permeates the Apocryphon of John. He has this idea of hylomorphism, which is to say that creation of male and female is that the male, this is Aristotle, is not me, the male provides the shape, which is the morphe. Okay, the form or the shape is the morphe. And the female provides the matter, which is the hyal. And so when the male and female come together, basically the male stamps his shape or form onto the female's matter. Now, what happened in the Apocryphon of John is that Sophia was supposed to mate with another, that as a consort, she was supposed to gain the consent of her consort, come together, male and female, and create, but she didn't. She created on her own. And what she created, the Apocryphon is very clear, is without form, or it was misshapen, they say. And that's Yaldabaoth, this misshapen thing. And they even called it like an abortion and so on. So that the material world, which she accidentally creates, the material world is this misshapen or unshapen mass or matter, And it really feels like, say, the prima materia in the alchemical tradition. This matter before it has any shape or form. And I think this is really the fundamental role that Sophia plays within the whole Gnostic tradition, is that she's accidentally creating the material world, and the material world is the place of ignorance. That we are trapped within the material world. We're trapped within Yaldabaoth in the sense of sexual desire and desire to conquer others and so on, fulfilling our needs. And so, this is where we find ourselves. And so we find ourselves in need of redemption, just as Sophia herself is in need of redemption, and the creation that she made is in need of redemption. And fortunately, Gnosticism then does offer, the solution to how to escape from this place of darkness, or as we said, hell, that we are already in a form of a multi-layered cosmic hell that is 7 planetary layers deep, that ruled over by Yaldabaoth, who, by the way, is also time. It's worth mentioning that the serpent with this tail in his mouth, it becomes an image then of time, that we are trapped within time. So yeah, I hope that little spiel didn't have too many lacunae, and might help.
That was good. Yeah, you got
and might help to describe. Yeah.
No, that's a
Who's
wonderful.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I would be curious though. Like Miguel, you've been doing this program for many years, and I'm sure that you might have an insight into Sophia that I lack, or have you managed to?
I've written about the many ways you can do. I think that's why Sophia is so fascinating to individuals, because there's many entry points, many versions. She's almost like a koan. I mean, obviously, wisdom is wisdom. Why it was inevitable that wisdom was going to rebel, that she was going to be Luciferian like Prometheus and other gods, because wisdom has to know, and wisdom has to go through things to become self-actualized. If you meet a wise person, they've gone through a lot, and they've probably done a lot of shitty things to other people. That's how you get wise and get through the other side. So it was almost inevitable. Obviously, she's the great, she's that Luciferian trickster archetype. She's the great metaphor of the fall of the soul into matter, whether it's Helen of Troy, Alice in Wonderland, Dorothy in The Wizard of, or just Plato's soul. It's a female force that falls into the chaos and gives it shape. There's so many of those that I've written on my blog and talked about on the show, and we can get into the idea of the Hebrews had the idea of the fallen Shekinah, that the wisdom lost in the world that you find in the Old Testament. So does the Book of Enoch, where wisdom is hiding from humanity in a cloud. There's this, and this idea was there. And of course, then you get into the primordial goddess like Ashira and Anna. Again, the goddess that goes into the chthonic worlds for some trial or tribulation. So now we're getting into myth and archetype. We're getting into places that we still haven't invented a good language for. That's why artists like you do a good job of putting it in art, because I think that's how we can experience. We still don't have the language to really understand the power of Sophia. So that's some of my my takes on. So, and it should be also noted too, Laurence, and you mentioned this too, but in the Valentinian system, what Irenaeus talks about, Sophia falls out of the border of the Horus into the chaos, and then gives birth. That this universe is her shame, her passion, the release of her liquids as she's freaking out and falling maybe for billions of years, if we want to talk science fiction, and she gives birth to the Demiurge and all that. But in the secret book of John, it should be mentioned, as soon as she has that thought, she has Yaldabaoth, she has the abortion in the Pleroma, or the eternal realm. And then she creates like a cloud, like, oh shit, like I don't want to sound crude, but yeah, like some high school girl at prom having an abortion in the bathroom. I know it sounds crude, but this is hard language that they were using. And she's hiding this creature, and then she goes out of the eternal realm, and then Yaldabaoth turns around and goes, no, Mom, I'm taking it. And Yaldabaoth takes all her power or part of her power and decides he's going to create the universe. And then comes the saga, and then she has to, and in these stories, she always repents, and she has to create sort of a rescue operation with the universe to redeem the universe because her son has taken much of her power.
Which you mentioned, and I think is very important, is that in these myths, she is the protagonist. She is the female hero. And how often do you have or anti-hero? How often do you have a story, a myth, where the female figure is, especially a spiritual story, we're dealing here with sacred traditions, a sacred tradition where she plays this primordial role. And as you said, she's very much an image of the soul, of our soul, in need of redemption. And I see that that might cause her to be viewed negatively as a hero, that she needs someone else perhaps to save her. But still, the idea is there that her descent and then her rising again is our experience, that we can identify with her story because it's our story at the same time, and we're in the same situation as her somehow, in that dream realm of the myth that's being told to us. So I believe that Gnosticism is unique that way, that you can have this female protagonist who is symbolic of the soul journey through this dark night of the soul, and then its eventual journey towards the light.
Yeah, and it should be mentioned, the great lesson too is she can't do it alone. She needs help, like we all do. Our souls aren't going to redeem themselves. Sorry, people. We got to do the work, get the help. And she gets help not just in some stories from Jesus, but she gets stories from her higher self, the bar below, or the Enoia, what it is. It's a group exercise, and they work together to again redeem the universe. In fact, in the trimorphic Pretanoia, it's actually the bar below who has to come and save Jesus from the cross. So there's this sort of good teamwork between these aeons, these aspects of God. But yeah, I think Sophia is still sort of the central heroine, or even anti-heroine. She gets kind of Machiavellian in some stories, like the hypostasis of the Archons and so forth. But again, wisdom is wisdom. That's how you get to wisdom, right?
But I love also that you do have the primordial story of how she separates from her consort, and yet her consort then descends to be with her in the underworld, and together they can rise again. So that in the Valentinian tradition, and I think it's true for most of Gnosticism, really, basically sacred sex is an important rite within the Gnostic tradition and within many tantric traditions, where the idea being that through that rite there is redemption. Through that rite there is a moment of experiencing the higher realms, and that they create the entire mythology around this idea that the two consorts must reunite in order for perfection and the lower world to rise up and actually be abolished, and for the two to enter into the higher world of the Pleroma, as it's called, the fullness, the realm of the one. And the one being, of course, a unity of opposites, of all opposites, including the gender opposites. So there you are.
Well said, indeed.
No, I mean, as I get older, I find that the Gnostic texts, they have such a variety that in a way, those what were they, 52 different tractates that we discovered in Nag Hammadi, they're so various, and yet they like puzzle pieces that come together in unexpected ways, and there's always new ways to put those pieces of the puzzle together and kind of go aha, and have those aha moments, those insights, those
koans, where you go,
epiphanies.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And they're like koans in that sense.
Yeah, it's an experience. And yeah, the ancient Greeks were lovers of Sophia. They thought if we can get Sophia, we can make a much better universe, restore the universe. So the quest continues, and hopefully Sophia is returning in some way or another in these days when we need her more than ever. Vance, any questions about Sophia out there on the internet?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah, I know. As soon as you mentioned
I mean,
that, it's gonna be...
yeah. Let's see. Which one should I do first? I'm trying to. Let's see. We had a Sid Ropp was bringing up the idea of gender and sex with respect to Sophia. I think we've covered that partially, but what have you to say, Laurence, about the relationship of, is there sex in the Pleroma? Is there gender in the Pleroma? How do you?
Yeah, no, it is a very interesting question, because nowadays, in this modern and postmodern world where we have gender studies and so on, you have to be, we have our very specific view of not putting down the feminine. Now we have to remember that Gnosticism emerged, 2,000 years ago in a very different environment. And so you have this binary, which is masculine, feminine. And then you have another binary, which is spiritual and material. And the question is, how do those two binaries click together? And it is that the spiritual is the masculine and the material is the feminine. It really gets divided up that way. And that's not going to please a lot of people. In other words, I understand, I have many friends and colleagues and fellow artists who very much want to find in Sophia a goddess of wisdom who is kind of like Wonder Woman. She's everything and she can do everything. But she has a very specific role to play in the Gnostic story. And the role that she plays in the Gnostic story is she's the fallen one. She creates the material world. And this makes us uncomfortable today, because we don't want to view the feminine as the dark, material, faulted source of the cosmos, right? Like Miguel was saying, she's in a sense the anti-hero, But I think we have to take those steps in order to move through the myth and move through the myth as a whole. And if we do take those steps, then we come out the other side. And when we come out the other side, the story is that fundamentally what we're looking for is to bring the masculine and the feminine together. And this is a mystery in Gnosticism, the rite of the bridal chamber and the Valentinian tradition. But that I come back that I do believe they were struggling with this problem of how is it that we're creating more and more people on the planet, and this is a place of suffering. So how is it that that process can be liberated, and how can that process be sanctified? And the rite of the bridal chamber is a way of sanctifying the continuation of humanity by saying that, okay, those who are, possess awareness, those who are the elect, which is to say that they have the spark of light within them, then those two sparks of light come together and they're able to create a new spark of light, and that will all be brought together into the Pleroma in the end. They're struggling, I think, with the material world, the evils of the material world, the problem of desire, and how they can integrate all these things without kind of being moralistic about it. That's the church's way, is kind of like, you shouldn't give in to your desire too much or whatever. They are finding a place for desire within their schema of things. And in that sense, we're happy to be Gnostics because we have a worldview which supports our fundamental way of being and existing, although it requires a certain amount of awareness to comport yourself, let's say, with others in the world with a certain degree of awareness. Good. That's about as far as I can get on that one.
Well, it occurs to me that way back in the ancient times, there was probably a stigma against a woman bearing a child without having a husband. And so the fact of Sophia, bearing Yaldabaoth without her consort, maybe, and that creating a quote unquote bad world, maybe that's where that story came from. Maybe that's where it came from in their imagination. They figure as below, so above, so to speak.
But there is this entire image of the sacred whore, and especially if you read the Simon Magus story, where Simon Magus finds Helena, and depending on how you interpret the text, he finds her as a prostitute, but he says that she is the sacred prostitute. And definitely you have this idea of the prunikos, the whore within Gnosticism. So the sacred whore and the Thunder Perfect Mind.
I was just going to say,
plays with that plays with I am the wife and the virgin, I am the whore and the holy one. So
see, that's perfect, right?
She encompasses, she brings together, this idea of the whore being the woman who acts on her own. But is this something that we should be demeaning, or is this actually, we can take it and turn it on its head and say, actually, what she did was partly salvific, it's a sacred thing, that it leads to the final movement upward to us all becoming virgins in the light, as the Gnostics would say, and becoming androgynous as well, that eventually in the upper eons, all the upper eonic beings are androgynous, perhaps with a male or female name, but androgynous beings, which makes perfect sense, that we're in the place of unity, and the place of unity would not have these divisions of male and female in any deep sense. So,
at least not separated. More questions.
One thing I just wanted to say too. Another great teaching of Sophia is that if you see the Aeons as the mind of God, the supreme idealized mind that we should have, if we could have the mind of God, each one of us becomes superheroes in our own story. But Sophia, all our aspects have to be working together. We have to have our intuition, our wisdom, our logos, everything, our memory. If we have everything working together, if we have one part of our mind that's taking too much energy or going on its own, then the whole mind collapses and we get the deformed ego, which is what Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, represents. And that's from Stephan Heller. From a psychological point, the Fall of Sophia, again, is a wonderful lesson about how to keep a balanced mind where everything is accessing each other. I mean, we live in a time when the left mind, reason, logic is taken over. And well, we got in the 20th century, the bloodiest century in the history of mankind. So we need to get back to wisdom. We need to have everything working together.
But it is curious the way the Apocryphon of John constructs that is, you have all these pairings of consorts. And so in the sense, the mind is this perfect mandala where each one finds its opposite to balance it out.
Yeah.
And then Sophia is that one element that doesn't find its complement, its opposite, to balance it, right? And it throws the whole thing off balance just because she doesn't find her true complement. And in that sense, I understand exactly what you mean, is that it's like this mandala suddenly breaks apart into disunity and into this fragmentary shape that we can't quite conceive anymore.
Exactly. I've got to let the cat out, Vance. Go ahead with the
We
question.
can do more questions. Yeah,
Sure.
this is a good point to bring in Mary Magdalene. Because of the relationship in my mind with Sophia, kind of a physical reflection of that. So, why don't you tell us about the relationship between Sophia and Mary Magdalene?
That's for me, or I can see Miguel's gone.
That's for you.
Okay.
That's for you.
Yeah, I mentioned Simon Magus, and Simon Magus appears in Irenaeus, his book Against All Heresies, but he does, and then he reappears in other texts from the heresiologists. So Hippolytus, also another heresiologist, writes a lot about Simon Magus. The story being that Simon Magus was the savior figure who was searching for that female figure from above, who he calls Enoia. And Enoia, of course, is mentioned also in many Gnostic texts as Sophia, that fell. And she fell into a human body, and she was reincarnated over many lifetimes. So this is the way the Yalta Ba'ath and the Archons were able to entrap Sophia, was by keeping her spark of life and her identity within a female body and reincarnating over time. And so Hippolytus and Irenaeus say she reincarnated as Helen of Troy, for example, and she also reincarnated as the lost sheep. Now, this image of the lost sheep also applies to Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdalene also being the one who weeps and cries. And the more you read the story of Simon Magus and Helena, you realize that there's many parallels between Helena and Mary Magdalene. They were both whores, for example, or prostitutes, or reputed to be whores or prostitutes. Yeah. And so then Simon Magus is a savior figure. Jesus Christ is a savior figure. And the myth is that he descends in order to find her, and find the lost sheep. And when he finds the lost sheep, he's able to remind her of who she was, where she came from, because she's in a certain sense forgotten, over many reincarnations, and then bring her through this gnosis of being reminded of who she was, bring her to the higher heavens. So Mary Magdalene plays that role perfectly in the story. And if you see the mentions of Mary Magdalene then in, for example, the Gospel of Philip in the Nag Hammadi library, it's mentioned that the Savior kissed her often on the lips, and that she was the one who understood better than all the other disciples, and she plays a very special role among the disciples as being the one who. Now, this is where we have to be very careful. I would argue that you have Christ and Sophia as these upper aeonic beings, and that Christ descends into Jesus, who is kind of a physical human being. And Sophia has descended into Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdalene has even forgotten that she is Sophia. And so Jesus and Mary Magdalene meet each other, come together, and we get kind of the story of how they had their relationship. We're not quite sure what the full extent of that relationship was, what it means that they kissed often on the mouth, for example. But that definitely the whole image of the bridal chamber where Christ and Sophia will come together has its reflection in Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Yeah. Now, what form exactly? I don't know if you're going to find it in the Gnostic texts. You can read and reread them, right? And you're always going to be given little hints, but you're not going to be given the full, clear picture of what the relationship was. And then you can go through history and find yourself going into the Cathars and all these other stories, and But But it's tantalizing. It's frustratingly tantalizing because we never really get the full picture of the relationship of Jesus to Mary Magdalene. Although, as I said, Simon Magus and Helena is probably the best model we have for what the relationship would have been.
Okay. Here's another one that's off of the Sophia theme a bit. Do Gnostics appreciate or adore the beauty of nature, or is nature despised because it's creation of the Demiurge?
Yeah, I've given a
that's
lot
an
of
easy
thought
one
to that
for
one.
Lawrence. Lawrence definitely talks about beauty a lot in his work.
Because I've had
Sure.
to deal with that issue. Is when you look up at the sun in the sky, do you see Yaldabaoth, or which is to say, it's just a door to our prison, and is the sun a doorway that we can't break past in our prison? This negative view of the cosmos. And then I'm reminded that Yaldabaoth was an ignorant god. He had no understanding at all. And yet he had the spark to create, and this is why he became the Demiurge. So how did he create, talking again about the matter and the forms, where did he get the forms for all the matter that's down here? And the forms are the Platonic ide, the ideas, the higher forms, so that he looked to the upper eons in order to model this world. And he did it imperfectly. They make that very clear. He did it imperfectly because he was dealing with matter, and matter is this hard kind of thing that doesn't hold the form very well. Also, the upper eons are in eternity. They're timeless, whereas down here, we're in the world of becoming and generation, and so everything's going to be changing and shifting. But I do believe that we can take the images that we see here and see through them to the higher forms. And that's the key. That's where the beauty resides, so that we can then enter through the image, is the expression from the Gospel of Philip, that we can behold anything like the sun or our partner, and see through the beauty of that person something that is higher. And something that is higher does shine through, because that was the original source and model for everything that we see down here. So we're trapped in ignorance, but it's not total ignorance, that we do possess the higher mind, and the higher mind includes grace and form and truth. And it's interesting, they don't mention beauty, but they do mention things like perception, which is aesthesis in Greek, so that we are able to see the higher forms that exist, that give beauty to this lower realm. This cosmos is a fallen copy of paradise. Thank you.
Simple answer. And ultimately, beauty is subjective, but I think, as a philosopher saying, but the feeling that we get, we all have different views of what beauty is, whether it's women or vistas out, nature, or apple pie, whatever it is. But the feeling of it, that's something you're supposed to run with. That's real, the experience of beauty. And even Plato said, most art is pornographic. What's out there is just shit. But whatever raises us to the world of ideas, that's true beauty, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it requires a different eye, because if we take the example of, your partner, if you approach it through only the desire to possess, then that's one, to me, you're looking with the eye of Yaldabaoth, but to look at just the sheer, to contemplate the beauty, and that requires stillness, that requires inner peace, that requires that we release ourselves from desire, which is a desire to seize immediately. Yeah. And Plato again talks about this in the Banquet through Aristophanes, that Eros is this has both qualities, that eros can be originally this desire to possess something, but in its higher form, it then becomes the contemplation of beauty eternal. Yeah, quite beautiful.
Yeah. The old saw, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? It's in the soul of the beholder. It's in the being of the beholder.
Mm.
Awesome.
So,
well, yeah, why don't we take a look at your cool images there, Laurence?
So
I'm
I
excited
do have a
about
question.
Of course.
Is this 2 hours, the entire...
No.
How long do we have? Do we have a specific amount of time, or...
Whenever you want.
Oh, really?
You
Okay, there's no...
you are the demiurge of this
There's
realm
no
now.
horos, no limit.
No. You go wherever you want to go.
Okay, good.
Vance and I are the baby syzygies out there in the distance.
Well, all right. Before I show some images, then I would like to maybe speak a little bit about the path I've been taking for the last 7 years and how this is part of that path, but now I seem to be moving closer to it. So for those who know me, I'm a painter, I'm a writer, and as a painter, one of the major projects I've had over the last 7 years was to create a painting academy in Vienna called the Vienna Academy of Visionary Art, where we pursue classical techniques of painting, but we also pursue visions. And it's all about pursuing the visions, bringing those visions into the paint, and getting the techniques that you need to create or represent those visions in a painting. And we had a lot of success doing that in Vienna over the last 7 years. And as we pursued it, our facilities expanded so that we had our studio where we were teaching painting, but we expanded also into 2 other large rooms, which we called our cultural space. One was the gallery. One of the large rooms was a gallery because it was fronted onto the street. And the other one was the temple because it was right under the studio and it was half underground. And it was fascinating to have this sacred space like the early Christians, where you're kind of in this underground, very safe space. And a lot of workshop leaders came to the Vienna Academy of Visionary Art and its cultural space to create workshops. And the workshops were based on the same approach, which is to say, by using painting to pursue visions and then represent those visions in paint, it becomes a healing process. That's where we go as human beings. We seek to pursue our traumas that we had, to work through those traumas in the visionary realm, and then see ourselves as healed and to find our way towards healing. Now, the workshops that went on in that space were pursuing the same lines through singing, through dancing, through, for example, one workshop would just be called Freeing Your Voice. And it was teaching people to sing, but not sing in the sense of learning specific notes and so on, but finding how your voice can resonate within your body and within your soul, and being able to express yourself through your voice. And same thing with movement and dance, and how people can free themselves to work out a lot of their inner body tensions and so on through movement. So there were many forms, and I could go on and on, of the fantastic teachers we had who were pursuing all these different healing modalities through various arts. Now, that went on for 7 years. And then the COVID crisis came. As everyone has heard, there's been this pandemic across the planet. The result for us is that we had to close, and we had to close immediately. It was literally overnight that we went from being a fully functioning academy and cultural space to having 0 people within our walls. And our international students had to fly back home within the span of a few days because all the countries were closing their borders. Really kind of a crazy situation. for us, what that meant was leaving Vienna and returning to our farmhouse in France, which is where I'm at now. On the other hand, it was a blessing in disguise for me, because as much as I wanted to dedicate all my time to creating this academy, I was losing the time to work on the paintings that were part of my larger vision. And you can see, for example, behind me, this painting that I'm working on. It's quite a large painting. It goes all the way up to the ceiling up here. Yeah, so and this
Incredible.
is the background of that painting. In other words, the design with the figures is everything's reversed here, so I have to get used to pointing the opposite direction. So this is the design that you see here with all the figures and so on. And I'll show you a close-up of that in a moment. But all those figures are going on to that painting that you see behind me. So everything that I learned through the academy and through the cultural space, and also writing this book, Sacred Codes, which we talked about in one of our interviews together, Miguel, has been leading me towards this next step. And this next step is the creation of a chapel. And this chapel is called the Apocryphon Chapel, because I want to take the book, the Apocryphon of John, or the Secret Book of John, and use that as a key to understanding the Gnostic myth, the Gnostic worldview, the cosmology. And so if you want to envision this chapel, what you envision is walking in and seeing this painting that's behind me would be the first of 12 paintings, and this would be on your left-hand side. And then there will be other paintings on the right, and you'll move through the chambers and you'll see all these paintings. My role is to create the space, create the chapel, create the paintings, and with, I hope, the help of some of my students and colleagues. And meanwhile, I'm going to invite people like the workshop leaders that we had in our cultural space to come and to use that space for healing and developing the rituals that would create forms of soul healing and so on. And it's quite amazing how spontaneously people were recreating a lot of the rituals mentioned by the Gnostics in their texts. So, for example, chanting, we were doing chanting down in our underground temple, and chanting through the sacred vowels and through the sacred notes that harmonize with the planetary spheres, for example. So let me show you a few pictures, and let's see, I have to do a screen share. So let's go to the screen share. And let's see, share your screen, entire screen share. Let's see, I have to get it right. Okay. Tell me if this is working or not. Are you starting to, are you seeing the?
Yeah. Now we see it, yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is not a permanent design, but it would look something like this, the chapel, if you were to approach it from the outside. I'm not fixated on the elevation, as it's called, this design here, but what I am fixated on is this part. And so on the left, do you see my cursor moving or not? It's not very large.
We see it.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yes.
So there is the Genesis passage, which is here on your left.
Right.
And as you come in, there are these 3 rooms, one leading into the next, moving towards this altar of Sophia at the back. So if you stood here, you would see the altar of Sophia through the doorways. And on the left is the Genesis of the upper eons, and that's the painting I'm going to show you in a moment. And then after you have the Genesis of the upper eons, which is how the one divides into the various eons, you have the fall of Sophia on the right, and then you move through and you will have the Genesis of the lower eons, which is, say, Yaldabaoth, and how he creates the anthropos, but this is the psychic anthropos. And then he blows his breath or pneuma into Adam, and you'll see that on the right, and so on. Then the fall of humanity, which is to say the creation of the hylic anthropos, or the physical one. And as you pass through into the central chamber, there's a baptismal font in the middle with a triptych and the 5 seals ritual being represented in the main panel of the triptych. On the left, you have Adam and Eve before the tree of Gnosis, where they are receiving the fruit of knowledge, which is to say Gnosis or awareness. And on the right, an image of the redemption of Sophia, so how Christ and Sophia return to the upper eons. Then you pass through what I call the apocalypse chamber, and that's to say what happens. The first part was about the creation. The last part is about what happens after we die and the dissolution of the cosmos. So in the first image that you would see as you come through, you would see the soul ascent, but the soul ascent through the lower eons, which is to say the 7 or 12 regions of Yaldabaoth. Then, if you pass through on the next wall, you'll see the soul ascent through the upper eons, and this becomes the continuation of that same journey. Opposite is the apocalypse of the Archons, and this is described in the Gnostic texts, how the 7 heavens fall upon each other, and Yaldabaoth has a war with his own Archons, and they all fight against each other and destroy each other. And finally, we'll have the bridal chamber on one wall and the return to the source, to oneness in the opposite, as you step out the door back into the world. So that's kind of the overall plan, which is to say 12 large paintings, including this triptych in the main inner sanctum. And those are some of the drawings now that I make in order to prepare. So if you're familiar with the Apocryphon of John, then you have the mother and the father, which you see here, gazing into each other's eyes. And through their gaze, they create the third, which is the Christ, and he will appear below them. And the Christ is actually kind of hidden away on the corner here, but this will be Christ gazing upward over here. And then between Christ and Sophia is over here on the left, is the Anthropos, which is this figure inside the geometry in the middle here. And this figure is Adam under the tree. He's coming up in another painting. He doesn't belong in this work. And at the very top on the right left, you get a glimpse of one of the 4 lights, as they're called, like Armozel and Oriel and Davathe and Elalith. Those are the 4 lights. So you see one of them. So put all those drawings together. And then here's the background that they're going on. So this gives you now an idea of what I've created on that canvas behind me. This is just the background. And the background is this hall of, it's really the divine mind, yeah? And I won't take the time to explain all the stuff on the pillars, but it has to do with Pythagoras and Plato and the entire creation of the harmonic system and sacred geometry that gives us all the measures of the cosmos. And we go higher and higher and higher. And you can see that this entire shape of a chapel is the divine architecture. So on top of that, then, you will have this. And this is... Now you're seeing the figures that I drew kind of superimposed, just using Photoshop to give me an idea of where everything goes. And I transfer this then onto the canvas and I start painting it. But you begin with the divine eye that you see in the center here. And the divine eye has these tears coming on either side, as well as its active vision that you see in this ray of light. It'll be more luminous once I paint it, creating the mother and the father that you see here gazing into each other. And the mother and the father then create the Christos that you see here gazing back up at them. And the Christos himself then takes the watery light of the eons, and through the watery light of the eons, he creates the 12 upper eons, as they're called, around the anthropos. So these are the 12 upper eons around the anthropos.
Wow.
And the highest one is truth, or aletheia. And if I go towards the left, going down, you'll see form. And then it gets a bit vague in the Apocryphon of John. Sometimes there's pronoia, sometimes there's epinoia, but she's either forethought or afterthought. Take your pick. And so moving then to, say, 9 o'clock, you have memory, or nime, and then perception, aesthesis, and peace. And at the very bottom is Sophia. And then moving to the right of Sophia, who is wisdom, you have perfection, idea, understanding, love, and grace. So we spoke about mandalas, and the idea is that this is like a kind of a mandala. It's the 12 eons around the anthropos, who is the pneumatic or spiritual anthropos created in the upper heavens. So there you have it. And the whole thing, let's see, kind of appears like that once you see the whole painting. And this is 3 meters tall, so let's say about 10 feet tall, and 1.5 meters wide, so around 5 feet wide as a painting. It's quite large. And that will be the first painting that you see on the left-hand side as you come in the chapel. So I just wanted to share that with everyone, because this is part of my project or plan for the future.
It's wonderful. And where is this chapel going to be, or is it too early to tell?
Are you seeing what I'm seeing? I'm kind of seeing a screen within a screen.
Yeah, you've got the famous.
We're going to
infinity.
move through the tunnel of. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how you fell into that canoma there, Laurence.
I have to escape the. I'll hit stop screen.
You got out of the matrix.
Good. Yeah, we are fortunate that where I am right now in France, I'm about 2.5 hours south of Paris in a place called Burgundy. We have a beautiful farmhouse with quite a bit of property. Mm-hmm. And I'm debating whether we'll create the chapel here on our property, or quite simply buy a church and then create the paintings within the church that we buy. So I'm not that far ahead in my thinking yet, because after 7 years of creating the academy in Vienna, I now understand how to deal with a project like this. In Vienna, we had assistants, we had many students and people coming, and it was a great deal of organization, but my wife and I basically figured out the logistics of how to do it. So now we're taking a year off, and after this year off, we're going to move into the next step. And the next step would be find the land or find the building and start to manifest this project. And my personal project is to just start painting the paintings, as I said, on my own, but eventually with the help of other people. I'll continue to design the paintings, and with the help of other people, which is the way the masters had their studios back hundreds of years ago. And I worked in the studio of a master. Mm-hmm. I have my master named Ernst Fuchs, and the way I learned to paint was by working in his studio on large paintings. So I hope to continue that tradition by having people come and work on my paintings as my students or apprentices or whatever. So that's part of the vision that I hope to manifest over the course of the next 7 to 10 years. You know, I'm giving myself the time necessary to really create this, but it'll be my legacy. And as you can see, it's definitely a legacy which tries to.
Uh-oh.
It was so good up until that point.
Yes, exactly.
Good connection and great content.
For about an hour and a half, we were rolling. I wonder what happened. Maybe they shut it off. The yellow vest got to him too there in France. Or something.
Just that painting, that first painting, just is amazing.
Ooh, yes,
it's just amazing.
Yes.
Could you imagine what it looks like in person?
Oh my God, I can't wait to visit that chapel. And I hope you guys there in the chat room in the audience, if you're listening to the audio version, definitely take a look at the YouTube version around, I don't know, minute 45, and or minute 30 we start doing it, because it's going to be an amazing project. I can always feel the energy, but I don't know if Laurence has gotten back, what happened, but I'll do a little housekeeping, and if not, we shall we shall shut it off. Yeah, here's some quotes, but great energy there in the chat room. Oh, I think, let's see if Laurence has gotten back.
I disappeared, or
yes,
everyone disappeared.
You weren't talking to yourself for a while? I hope not.
What did happen, and when did I get cut out?
You were gonna say, I hope my legacy is.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So, yeah, that's basically it. I hope my legacy will not glitch the way it's glitched just now. And someone asked me to touch my nose, so for you, I am touching my nose.
Look at that, interactive.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think that's it. What was I going to say? I've been such a good conversation. I haven't done any, like they say, housekeeping, but yes, the audio version will be out. I'll probably do it tomorrow. Today, I promised the kids to take them to the water park because it's very hot in the Midwest these days.
Mm-hmm. Lucky you. Yeah. It's cold out here.
Really? No, I love it. It's been hot, so I'll take it. And then, please don't forget to support Aeon Byte. I am offering voiceover services. There's the Finding Hermes program. There's a lot of good content. We had a great show on Tuesday night. We're going to reschedule and do Gordon White's live show. And next week, we'll also have one of my favorite I don't want to say neo-Gnostics, astro-Gnostics, Jessa Reed will be on Finding Hermes. She'll be talking about her experiences of overcoming addiction, alien encounters, and a lot of cool stuff. So a lot of good stuff, and I appreciate the support and company of everyone who is here. Vance, do you have a last comment or question for Laurence?
No, except that I think that painting, that your first painting, is just phenomenal. Miguel and I were saying when you were disconnected, what would it be like to actually be able to see it in person? You know, it's like I feel there's so much stuff coming from it, so much information.
Thank you.
Congratulations, and make sure you set up a trust and a foundation, get somebody to continue your legacy on through the centuries.
Thank you. And thank you, Miguel, for providing this platform for me and for all, your guests who we're a crazy lot, but we need to be heard. And you're the one who listens to us. So I'm grateful for that.
It's my therapy, my cosmic therapy. Sophia and her son need a lot of family counseling. This podcast is also my therapy too. And Laurence, I always love having you on the show. Again, I have all your books. I reference them a lot. You're a brilliant scholar, a great artist, and you're just a cool guy.
Thank you.
So it's great. It's an honor to have you here on Aeon Byte. And where can the audience learn? Do you have a website or anything online?
Yeah, I do. So feel free to check out my website, which is lcarwana.com, LCARUANA. The Vienna Academy of Visionary Art also has a website, and you can see a lot of images on the Facebook page, because the Facebook page was keeping up all the time with all the different events. And then through that, you can see a lot of the works of our students, because I'm extremely proud of all the art that was created over the course of the 7 years at the Academy. So check out their work, buy their art, because I don't, I sell reproductions of my work, but I don't sell originals, but they definitely need to survive. So I really would encourage everyone to check out my books and you can get reproductions of my work. And that of my students, of course.
Definitely get Hidden Passion, where Laurence, it's a novel he wrote, and it's a story of the Gnostic Jesus, if there would be a Gnostic Jesus, and it's a wonderful story, very powerful, and very loyal to the Nag Hammadi library. So check out Hidden Passion or any of his works.
But it was that novel, The Hidden Passion, which brought it all together in my mind. And then I realized that I could create this chapel, and no one has really illustrated the Gnostic worldview. No one has taken the time to really show us what Yaldabaoth looks like. And so I really consider it to be a challenge to be able to bring that novel, which is my summary of Gnosticism, into visual form in a space where people can then appreciate the paintings, but also experience their own soul healing that might take place in a space like that.
Such a great idea.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm going to have visionary exercises to hopefully one day walk through that chapel and hang out with you, Laurence.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's hold on to that for that'll happen one day.
Yes, it will. I'm holding on to it. And yeah, well, for the audience, thank you for keeping us company. You guys are all great. Vance, thanks for keeping us company here on this Saturday.
Oh, it's a delightful morning for me, and great to be with you, Laurence.
Thank you.
Laurence, yes, thank you very much. And as always, good luck with everything. And we look forward to the next time we can chat.
Okay.
Good night, everyone. Good night. Well, good afternoon. Good morning, wherever you are.
Good night.
Sophia.
Good existence.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everyone.